There is a long period or stretch of time in the Malazan history that I like to call the Silent Years. This was a period of time when gods and ascendants were somewhat inactive. They weren't directly affecting the mortal races around them in huge contests of power. Most of the continents were in a relative state of calm. The only struggles were predominantly mortal in nature. Then suddenly it all changed. It's like someone snapped their fingers and suddenly the whole world is filled with a flurry of ascendant activity. There are a lot of things you could point towards in trying to find that one single flame that caused the inferno to come. So I decided in my madness to look for answers for that pivotal figure, and I think I found him. Hood, the one and only god of death of the Malazan universe, is the key to the puzzle that is the Elders. Sometimes in Malazan, we encounter people who serve as vessels for specific gods, especially the gods of war such as Fenna and Tog. These vessels are called mortal swords, such as one of my favorite characters, Brocolian of the Grey Swords, a mortal sword of Fenna. In all Malazan history, there has never been an instance where Hood elected a mortal vessel to do his bidding. So why did Hood decide to choose Dasem Altar as his mortal sword? Does the god of death really need a sword? The existence of Dasem Altar as the sword of Hood signified a shift in the times. It felt like Hood was preparing for something, and when a god of such nature is scheming, then every other god or ascendant becomes nervous. The first to note the change was the Jagat Gothos, who we first met in the cave where Dancer and Calavint met. After those two left, he talks to a dead skull, and the skull chuckles at his questions. This was Hood because in all instances the god of death has manifested in the mundane Malazan world. He always talks through corpses. After Hood makes his move, we sense another shift in the times. The Azad houses begin to awaken. One of the first Azad houses to awaken was the one located in Malaz Island called the Dead House. This reawakening is noticed by three elder gods, Krul, the sister of Cold Knights, and the Errand. The three felt a gambit had been made by the Azad, and the sister of Cold Knights describes it best when she says,
I hear wheels of a gigantic wagon accompanied by the rattling of chains.
This quote points to the existence of that terrible chained wagon that holds off chaos. Hood and the Azad houses are two of the primary powers that I consider to be at the center of this gambit. Think of them as the ground underneath your feet. We all know when the ground moves, everything shakes or shifts in one way or the other. When these two moved, the other existing powers, either minor or major, took a notice. Kela, the one referred to as the High King, suddenly showed up in Malaz Island after being trapped for countless ages in a certain place. His name was Kela Aidarantes Testula. He was the ruler of the Warren commonly called the Scar. This Warren later becomes the Malazan Imperial Warren used by the Claws. It is filled with ash due to the destruction caused by a certain ritual orchestrated by Kela, where he killed every living thing in his realm except himself. This great sin was unforgivable, and he was confronted by the ancient gods such as Krul, Draconas, and the sister of Cold Knights. When Kela showed up in Malaz Island, he almost killed the sister of Cold Knights when he stabbed her with his sword that was tainted with Otataro dust. She survived that terrible wound but was weakened. Kela was pulled into the depths of the sea by a figure named the Fisher, who at first I thought was a Malaz Island ascendant protector, but it turns out was actually Mael, the elder god of the oceans. It turns out that the protectress of Liheng, Shalmanath, was a Tisteliosan, and just not any ordinary Tisteliosan, but a priestess of the ancient cult of Elder Light, and even a former starfeed to one of the legendary daughters of Light. She claims that she fled the ancient war of light and dark and found herself in Kwantali continent, where she decided to make a life for herself. The reason she fled the war was because she admired Anomandarek and was probably in love with him. We find out she is Tisteliosan when she decimated the forces of Itkokan during their siege of Liheng. Shalmanath, being the priestess of the cult of Elder Light, performed a ritual where she released the full might of Kural Deliosan against Itkokan's army, where concentrated liquid light burnt most of them to ash, and very few soldiers survived that display of might. Drake, the Worm of Autumn, interfered in the execution of Tescren and saved his life under the request of Cruel. Cruel had foreseen Tescren's importance in the future and informed Drake of this fact. If you are scratching your head right now wondering who Drake is, don't worry. He was not heavily involved in most of the Malazan books. All you need to know is that he is a major god in the Malazan world, and the cult of Drake believes that Poliel, the goddess of pestilence and illness, Beru, the lord of storms, and Hud are subservient to him. Whether this cult's doctrine is true is never expounded on. He appears to mortals as a worm-like being, with one end being a male figure who represents destruction and the other end is a female figure representing creation. I feel I should talk about Rylanderas, the White Jackal, but he was never really inactive. He had been occupying the Seti Plains for ages, and the people of the continent knew about this fact. However, I will talk about the re-emergence of the Beasthold. This is an ancient source of power, or ancient realm where different animal-like deities or gods exist. This re-emergence is noticed by Rylanderas, who encounters Ulura, Dancer's friend that controlled birds. He tells her that her talent for controlling them is due to her access of the Beasthold as her source of power. Now let's talk about the one power that really pushed most of the ascendants to act. Kelavind, in his infinite wisdom and lack of constraint, decided to find the throne of bone, which he succeeded in finding, and in the process, he awakened the Tilanimas. If you know anything about the Imas, then you know they were the ones responsible for the near extinction of the Jagat race, and to some extent of the Kitchen Shemale. Think of them as an undying race of genocidal maniacs. Their source of power is the Hold of Tellus, and it's where Kelavind found the Throne of Bone. Think of it as the ancient version of the Warren of Telan or Fire. The Tilanimas were not all awakened at the same time. They were divided into many tribes, and the first tribe to awaken were the remnants of the Logros Tilanimas, and the ones that guarded the Throne of Bone. This tribe was led by a bone caster who is some kind of tribal shaman, and his name was Ulpan Nodosha, and he wore a cave bear headdress. The other Imas of note from this group was Unus Tulan, who is called Tul in the main books, and his skill with the sword rivaled that of Dasem Alta. Now let's talk about another major power that is actually the crux or center of the events in the Malazan books of the Fallen, the crippled god. We notice his early movements through different people. For example, Heboric, the high priest of Fenar, and also his mortal sword, noticed a certain change in the activities of the pantheons. He had decided to investigate, and his journey took him to a temple dedicated to Poliel, where he met the goddess in person. She told him that a new sickness spreading in Kontali at the time was not of her making, that it was from another source. Boric asked whether she would confront this new power, but she said she had adopted a wait-and-see attitude, debating on whether to join this new power or confront it. You also see that Talo, the new Dambi Drake of the cult of Drake, was using his Warren of Thy in the Taint of Chaos. This taint proves that he was a follower or adherent of the crippled god. Another instance where we see the crippled god's machinations is when he hijacked Kelavin and Dancer as they were trying to leave the hold of Tellus. He forcefully brings them to his place of power, the tent by the shore, and he invites them to do his bidding and be his followers, but they refuse, and he casts them out angrily from his tent, and they end up in the lifeless desert of Stratum. These are some of the powers that were active during the early formation of the Malazan Empire. By the time we join the story in the Gardens of the Moons, over 100 years have passed and so many things have changed. Elder powers and races have always been fascinating to me, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.